So here we go. So first off, let me thank everybody for coming here today. This is generally a membership call for Real Estate Strategy Desk, which is an online community where we come together and we share some pain points about real estate. We do some masterminding, we just do some training, and lots of times we have a pretty good speaker that comes in. So today I invited Jeffrey Barnes to come in and speak for us. And because of how well Jeff presents this information, I wanted to open it up to other people. So we have some people in here that generally don't come to our membership calls, which we appreciate that you came and wanted to learn some more. If you wanted to learn more about the Real Estate Strategy Desk, you can just go to realestatestrategydesk.com. So here we have Jeff Barnes with us today. Jeff and I are in another membership group called Membership Freedom, and it's a place where people come together just like we do in our groups and mastermind together and listen and learn and develop our skills. So when I saw that Jeff was attached to Disney and started to learn a little bit about him, I was just intrigued and just felt he needed to be here and teach some of the lessons that he has learned over the years. So Jeff, it comes to us, he as a keynote speaker, that he's done that plenty of times. He's worked together workshops. He has courses that he'll talk a little bit later. He actually put together a course for a university, which he calls his dream course, where he was able to teach the history of Disney as a university professor. He has, to my knowledge, never worked for Disney, but has been to Disney World, Disneyland, and some global places for Disney almost 200 times. So he has put together over the years two best-selling books. One's called The Wisdom of Walt, and the other one's Beyond the Wisdom of Walt. And both of them hit the top sellers. So I don't want to tie up the time with me talking all about Jeff. I've watched his blogs. I listened to some of his things that he's put out, some videos, and I just thought, man, this guy needs to get in front of more people. So today, I want you to pull out your pens. I want you to turn off your emails. I want you to focus on your screen and listen to the leadership lessons from Walt Disney. Here's my buddy, Dr. Jeffrey A. Barnes.
Thank you, Jim. Good morning, everyone. Quick question. Raise your hand if you've ever had the opportunity to go to Magic Kingdom, Walt Disney World, or better yet, because I'm coming to you live from Southern California, Disneyland in Anaheim. Raise your hand. All right. What do we got here, Jim? 100%?
Yeah, I would say so. I don't have the screen set for all of them, but yeah.
Well, in the few faces I have up on my screen, every hand went up. And what I do is I work with leaders who love Disney and want to level up using Walt Disney's wisdom. And I've had the opportunity to write two best-selling books on that topic. I have a weekly newsletter on that topic. I was on the History Channel and the series How Disney Built America. And so what I'm going to be sharing with you today is my love and my passion, not just for Disney, but for the leadership lessons we can take from Disney, starting with a visit at Magic Kingdom. And we're going to be talking specifically about Disneyland this morning, but Magic Kingdom at Walt Disney World is very similar to Disneyland. And so it's applicable even if you've only been to one or the other. So I am going to, let's see, advance the slides here. And you'll notice, first of all, Walt here is celebrating Disneyland's 10th anniversary. And he took about 30 seconds that night, July 17th, 1965, to celebrate everyone who made his impossible dream possible. And then he spent the next hour talking about the future. And he said to his team, we are just getting started. And to some degree, he was referencing expansion at Disneyland. But what the people in the room did not know is that he had already purchased 27,440 acres of land that would ultimately become Walt Disney World in Florida. Now, here is an individual who was bankrupt at age 21 with his first studio, a Laugh-O-Gram studio in Kansas City, Missouri. Here is an individual who lost his first character, not Mickey Mouse, but Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. Here is an individual who, when it came time for him to build his dream Disneyland at the age of 53, nobody believed in it, to include his own wife and his own brother. And now his final dream is to build a second Disneyland, Walt Disney World, on 27,440 acres in Central Florida. So let me ask you a question. How many of you in your own life or maybe in your business are dealing with some challenges, some issues that are outside of your control, and you're constantly having to pivot and you're constantly having to find ways to be resilient? Raise your hand. That's the nature of life. That's the nature of business. That's the nature of being successful. And Walt Disney was constantly pivoting. Walt Disney was constantly being challenged and having to go in a new and different direction. And so we start our story this morning where every day at a Magic Kingdom begins, and that is on Main Street, USA. Now, people don't realize Walt Disney wasn't born successful. None of us are. Difficult relationship with his father. The only happy memories from his childhood come from the ages of 4 to 9, when they lived on a farm in the middle of Missouri in the little town of Marceline. When the farm failed, they had to sell everything, and Walt and his family moved to Kansas City. It broke the little boy's heart. And so when he is designing Disneyland, the number one issue for Walt was to go back to those favorite memories of childhood, recreate them, and give us Main Street, USA. And this is a lesson in leadership. We all have stories. We all have pain. Rather than running away from them, rather than hiding from them, we need to be vulnerable and lean into them. That's literally what the word vulnerable means, to lean into the wound. Walt leans into the wound of his childhood, i.e., moving from Marceline, the farm failing, ending up in Kansas City. And by leaning into that one, by being vulnerable, gives us the best version of a Main Street that has ever existed anywhere in the United States. Now, there's another really important leadership lesson here as well, and that is when Walt was designing Disneyland, the amusement park operators in the 1950s looked at what Walt wanted, and they were like, it's never going to work. We have no idea what this guy is up to. And their number one issue was Main Street. Now, it only cost $1 to get into Disneyland when it opened way back in 1955. And from there, you had to pay anywhere from 10 to 35 cents to do the individual ride shows and attractions. How many ride shows and attractions are there on Main Street?
0.
None. And so Main Street's great. It represents Walt's childhood. It's him as a leader being vulnerable. If we stay on Main Street, the critics who said he had no idea what he's doing and the park's going to be bankrupt, shuttered, and forgotten in 6 months or less, those critics would be right. Walt has to give us a reason to follow him. Walt has to give us a reason to go down Main Street and get deeper into the park so that we get deeper into our pockets and spend the 10 to 35 cents on the various ride shows and attractions. What's at the end of Main Street, USA?
The
The
castle.
castle. Yeah.
The castle. Now think about this. We've got main streets all over the United States. How many have a medieval castle at the end? None. This is Walt doing things a little differently. This is Walt being a little bit outside the box. This is Walt being weird. And there's a lesson in leadership. Leaders don't maintain. Leaders take us in new and different and sometimes outside the box and weird directions. And Walt gives us a reason to follow him by putting a medieval castle at the end of the street, and we can't get down there fast enough. So ask yourself this question. How do you know that you're a leader this morning? How do you know that you're a leader? Now, I was in higher education for 22 years. I've worked with universities on master programs in leadership, PhD programs in leadership. If you want to go back to school, that's great. I want to save you some time and money this morning. You know that you're a leader if and only if you have followers. Walt gives us a reason to follow him. Walt gives us a reason to go deeper into Disneyland. Walt gives us a reason to get to the end of Main Street USA. So set aside your title, set aside your position, set aside your power, set aside your authority, and ask, what reason have I given my team to follow me? Now, Walt hated organizational charts. And one of my favorite stories is how, and you've experienced this, you go to a Disney park, the cast members all only have their first name. Raise your hand if you've noticed that. Cast members only have their first name and where they are from. Walt Disney hated being called Mr. Disney. Because again, it wasn't about power, position, authority, or where he ranked in the org chart. And one of my favorite stories is Walt was eating breakfast one day at the Carnation Cafe. You can see it there on the left of your screen. And the cast member who was serving him was brand new. And out of respect, she kept referring to him as Mr. Disney this, Mr. Disney that. And finally, Walt stopped her and said, young lady, here at Disneyland, we only have two Misters, Mr. Toad and Mr. Lincoln. You can call me Walt. So again, you know that you're a leader when you have followers. What reason have you given your team to follow you? And forget about position, power, authority, and where you do or do not rank in the org chart. Now, here we're looking at Walt at the end of the street in what's known as the Central Plaza. Once we get down to Main Street USA, Walt lets us go. And we have choices to make. We have attractions to go to. We have lands to visit. Off of the Central Plaza are 4 lands: Adventureland, Frontierland, Fantasyland, Tomorrowland. Why 4 lands? Well, what's the emerging technology in the United States in the 1950s? Television. Now, I'll give you a quick definition of technology this morning. Television is anything invented or created after you were born. I was born in 1963. I don't consider television technology. The kids who are showing up at college today don't consider television technology. When I went to college 40 years ago, we knew who the rich kid was. Owen McMillan. Well, he sounded like the rich kid, but we knew who the rich kid was because he moved onto campus and into his dorm room with his own personal VCR. No one's showing up at college today with a personal VCR. You can watch whatever you want on your phone. The emerging technology in the 1950s was television. The average number of channels on a television set in downtown Los Angeles in 1955 was 4. So Walt gives us 4 channels, 4 lands, 4 stories, 4 choices. Now, what's really fascinating about that is Hollywood was terrified of television. Every movie producer, every studio was convinced that television was going to destroy their industry. And so you would get blackballed. You would be boycotted if you dared go into the television business. Walt embraced technology. This is part of the genius of his leadership. He had one foot in Main Street USA, which is a story from the turn of the century, another foot into Tomorrowland. He saw the power of technology, the power of innovation. He pivoted toward TV, made a partnership with ABC Television to get the funding that he needed for Disneyland, and as a result, got his dream, a place where parents and children could have fun together. So let me ask you this. What's the emerging technology in 2024? What's the piece of technology that we hear in the news almost every single day?
Is it AI?
AI.
AI. How many of you are afraid of AI? How many of you, when you hear about AI, you want to run as far away as possible? You have to evolve. You have to embrace technology, or you are going to disappear. How many of you remember growing up and waiting for the Sears catalog to show up and tell you what you wanted for Christmas in the annual wish book? Where is Sears today? I can
Gone.
remember going to Disneyland and seeing all of these Kodak picture spots. Where is Kodak today? They're on the dinosaur heap because they did not evolve, they did not innovate, they did not embrace technology. So you can be afraid of AI, but you've got to figure out how to embrace it so you can ultimately figure out how to leverage it. Anybody have a question or comment on that? All right. I want to talk a moment about Walt's first studio. You're actually getting a picture of it here. Again, Laugh-O-Gram Studio in Kansas City, Missouri. Walt is 21 years old in 1923 when this studio, after only 18 months, goes bankrupt. And Walt is a financial failure at the ripe old age of 21. And Walt has a choice to make. Now, what we don't realize often in our own life, whether it's personal or professional, is it's not what happens to you, it's how we respond to what happens to us. Walt could have stayed stuck in Kansas City, and that was the safer option. It's where his friends were, it's where his family was. He could have gone and gotten a regular job, and no one would have ever heard the name of Walt Disney again. Or he could board a train, come to California, take that leap, take that risk, and ultimately become a hero in Hollywood. Now, obviously, Walt decides to board the train, come to California, and fortunately is successful, becomes a hero in Hollywood and a household name by the 1940s. But when he goes down to Union Station in Kansas City, and I love this story, when he goes down to Union Station in Kansas City, he doesn't just board that train for California, but he boards it with $40, a single suitcase, and a one-way ticket. And so what I often challenge leaders to ask themselves is, what's your goal? What's your dream? What's your vision? Where are you trying to take your team? Where are you trying to take your company? And are you all in? Are you showing your team every single day that you've boarded the train, you're committed, and you're committed at a $40 single suitcase, one-way ticket kind of level? Because again, if Walt doesn't make that choice, we never hear the name of Walt Disney. We don't get Mickey Mouse. We don't get Snow White. We don't get Disneyland or Walt Disney World. How many of you have had a moment in your life where everything was going against you and you had to make the choice to persevere, make the choice to be resilient? Raise your hand. All right. Anybody want to share that story real quick?
I think we come to crossroads in our lives many times where we have to make those kind of decisions and go a different direction. Here you have this this piece of Walt where he has to decide in a direction to go. He was at a crossroad. He had to make a decision, or he can sit there and whine about his failures. And failure is always a stepping stone. It's never an option to stick in something you're failing at. So yeah, I've had situations where I've come across crossroads and just had to make a decision. I need to stick going the way I'm going, knowing it wasn't going to take me really where I wanted to go, or step out there and make a curve and take the curve in the road, so to speak.
Absolutely. And you look back on that, Jim, and realize that you're better as a result of that failure. Am I correct?
If you knew me 10 years ago, you would definitely see a totally different person.
Exactly. So one of the lessons here is persistence is never part-time. Because again, you got to be all in. $40, single suitcase, one-way ticket. Now, once Walt arrives in Hollywood, he joins forces with his older brother Roy, and together they build the largest entertainment company anywhere in the world. Now, what I find fascinating about this is Roy is Walt's older brother. If Walt doesn't come to California, Roy spends the rest of his life selling vacuum cleaners door to door in Los Angeles. And I'm often asked, well, what's the difference between Laugh-O-Gram Studio that lasted 18 months and the Disney Brothers Studio that, again, today is the world's largest entertainment company? The difference is not Walt. If Walt had had his own way, he would have bankrupted the second studio all over again. The difference was Roy. And so leaders, you got to know what your strengths are. And then you have to hire people better than you and hire people who shore up your weaknesses. You're never going to make it alone. We get a lot farther in life when we do things together. And again, as leaders, you're responsible for making sure that you hire people, again, better than you and not people who are exactly like you. Make sense? Okay, so Walt's in California. He's joined forces with his older brother, Roy. They established the Disney Brothers Studio in October of 1923. By the way, if you saw Disney 100 last year, that's what this was all about. It was celebrating Walt coming to California, joining forces with Roy, and establishing the Disney Brothers Studio as an entity 100 years ago, which was a great celebration. I was a little frustrated, if I'm going to be honest, because in celebrating, they never told the bankruptcy story, and they never talked about Walt getting on the train and coming to California with $40 single suitcase one-way ticket. I think we all want success, and we can identify with failure. And so that's why these stories are so important, and that's why these stories are so powerful. So he's in California. He's in partnership with his brother. He has a brand new studio, and he's finally going to create his first successful cartoon character. Anybody know his name? Who says Mickey Mouse?
Mickey Mouse.
Well, Walt once said, we can never forget that it all started with a mouse. But it actually didn't. It started with a fellow by the name of Oswald, the not-so-lucky rabbit. Walt will lose Oswald in a distribution dispute with Universal in March of 1928. And on the train ride home from that meeting and that conversation, staring bankruptcy in the face all over again, Walt pulls out a pad of paper, sketches out a story, shows it to his wife Lily, and says, honey, what do you think of this guy? And Lily says, why, Walt, he's cute. What are you going to name him? And Walt says, well, I'm thinking of maybe possibly, what if we went with, well, Mortimer? And Lily is horrified. Oh, Walt, no, that name is awful. What if you went with Mickey instead? And so it was in that moment that the world's most popular and, yes, profitable cartoon character was born. And so the question that I keep asking is, what if Walt never goes bankrupt and spends the rest of his life in Kansas City? Great town, great barbecue, great football team. But again, I don't think we ever hear the name Walt Disney. And what if he never loses Oswald? He never has a need for Mickey Mouse, and he built his entire life, his entire career, his entire empire on Mickey Mouse. And it was people wanting to come and visit Mickey Mouse, plus Walt's desire to build a place where parents and children could have fun together, that give us not an amusement park, but the world's first theme park, Disneyland, which opened July 17th, 1955. Now, we're going to go through different lands today. We've already been on Main Street and told a little bit of Walt's backstory. Now let's go into the different lands and talk about the leadership lessons we can learn from here. First up, we have Frontierland. Now, when Disneyland opened in 1955, Frontierland was the largest land in the park because, again, it's based on the technology of television. What is the most popular genre? What are the most popular stories on television in 1955?
The West.
The West, Cowboys and Indians, exactly. And so here, Walt, this is the dedication plaque. Here we experience the story of our country's past, the colorful drama of frontier America in the exciting days of the covered wagon, the stagecoach, the advent of the railroad, and the romantic riverboat. Easy question for you. What do a covered wagon, a stagecoach, a railroad, and a riverboat all have in common? What are they?
Transportation.
They are modes of transportation. You only need a mode of transportation when you're what?
Moving.
Trying to get somewhere. So as leaders, ask yourself, what's the goal? What's the vision? Where are we headed? That's the difference between leadership and management. Managers dot the I's, cross the T's, and there is a role for managers. Roy was a great manager. Leaders say, here's where we are, but here's where we're going. Who wants to get on board? Who wants to go with me? I've had the honor and privilege of moderating and interviewing events with Disney legends, Disney Imagineers, who were hired by Walt and worked alongside Walt. And when I asked them about Walt's death back in December of 1966 to a person, they won't talk about it, and they become very emotional because Walt took them to places in their life and in their career that they know they never would have achieved on their own. So again, leadership is about where are you going? Why does your team have a reason to follow you? It's not management. It's not dotting the I's. It's not crossing the T's. You have people on your team who are excellent at that and make sure those sorts of responsibilities get taken care of. A couple of fun stories. The very first attraction completed for any Disney park anywhere in the world is the old Frontierland stagecoach. It was actually built at the Disney studio in Burbank and then shipped the 30 miles south to Anaheim and again installed as the very first attraction. And Walt's favorite Imagineer, a fellow by the name of John Hinch, was putting the final piece on that attraction before they shipped it down to Anaheim. And it was the leather strap that you can see the stagecoach driver holding there in the picture. No matter what John Hinch did, he could not get that leather strap to Walt Disney's liking. And out of frustration, John throws the strap across the room and says, Walt, it is just a leather strap. No one's going to notice. No one's going to care. And Walt looked John in the eye and said, John, you are underestimating people. Our guests are going to notice. Our guests are going to care. In fact, every time someone comes to a Disney park, they're going to see something and notice something that they've never seen or noticed before. And that's what's going to keep them coming back over and over again. How many of you have been to Disney not just once, but multiple times? Walt predicted your behavior when he called his Imagineer out on not paying attention to the details. On any given day, the guests at any Disney park, 70% are return guests.
Wow.
So again, having the vision to pay attention to the details and make sure that you're providing a level of experience and a level of service that isn't seen anywhere else in your industry. Here's another fun story. At the end of Main Street USA here in California, you have Coke Corner. It's Casey Corner in Magic Kingdom in Florida, but it's Coke Corner here in California. And it's an odd-shaped space, and it has alternating light bulbs, half red, half white. Except because it's an odd-shaped space, it has an odd number of light bulbs, and so you had two next to each other that were the same color. This really bothered Walt Disney. Team members can remember seeing Walt standing under that space, staring at the two light bulbs the same color next to each other for hours on end, until one night Walt went to the maintenance yard, grabbed his own bucket of paint, his own paintbrush, and painted that last light bulb half red, half white. Now, I thought my mother had issues, but again, here you see Walt with the vision, right? The vision for Mickey Mouse, the vision for Snow White, the vision for Disneyland, and also making sure that the details are paid attention to. And if you're not a detail person, that's okay. As a leader, you're still responsible for the details. Hire someone who is going to take care of those things for you. Now, here's another fun lesson out of Frontierland. Anybody old enough to remember riding the pack mules? I didn't think so. The pack mules aren't there anymore. Anybody want to take a guess as to why? Well, what do you think of when you think of a pack mule?
You got to clean up behind them.
They're messy, right? They're smelly. They're difficult. They're stubborn. They're obstinate. Are we talking about pack mules or maybe members of your team? Leaders have to have the courage to have difficult conversations. Now, the philosophy at Disney is hire well, train well, let the people go. And when I say let the people go, I mean let them do their job. And if you're constantly having course correction conversations, you may have to have the ultimate let them go conversation, because the best way to destroy an amazing, talented team is for you as a leader to tolerate a bad team member. So no pack mules, no drama. Here's where we are. Here's where we're going. We need everybody on board. $40 single suitcase, one-way ticket. And don't let any of the pack mules drag you behind. Any questions or comments on that? All right. Anybody here like Doritos? And it's a little early for Doritos here in California, but yeah, I love Doritos as well. Invented at Disneyland. Here's the story. The original budget for Walt's dream of Disneyland was $3.5 to $4 million. By the time he opened the park, he had somehow managed to spend well over $17 million. And he didn't have the money to run the shops. He didn't have the money to run the restaurants. He didn't have the money to even run the Disneyland Hotel. All of that is leased out to third-party vendors. The original restaurant in Frontierland was Casa de Fritos, run by the giant chip maker Frito-Lay. One night, an ingenious rank-and-file cast member recognizes that at the end of the evening, they would be dumping tons of tortillas into Disneyland's garbage. And he's like, why are we throwing this good food away? What if we cut it up? What if we deep fried it? What if we put seasoning on it? What if we sold it as a snack the next day? That's exactly what they did. And over time, Frito-Lay's popular Disneyland snack became the most popular snack in the park, so much so that by 1966, Frito-Lay took its Disneyland snack national, and we know them as Doritos today. If you look at the original Doritos branding, it's almost identical to the old Disneyland sign that used to stand out on Harbor Boulevard in Anaheim here in Southern California. How many of you like that story? And it's an example of hiring well, training well, letting people go, and knowing that they're going to have better ideas and be more creative and more ingenuity than you as the leader and you as the executive. Any questions or comments on that? All right. Favorite attractions. Anybody have a favorite Disney park attraction? Let's hear about that today. What's your favorite?
There's so many. I think a classic is the Carousel Progress.
That was Walt Disney's all-time favorite attraction. And
We get that song stuck in our head and we just sing it the whole day.
It's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Love the optimism and vision of that song. And not built for a Disney park originally. was built for the 1964-65 New York World's Fair, brought home to Disneyland in 1967, and then transferred to Walt Disney World and opened in 1975. Great choice. Someone else, what's your favorite Disney park attraction?
I always love It's a Small World.
You got to be careful about It's a Small World, because when you think of that attraction, what do you also think about?
I think
The
about,
song.
Stuck in your head.
yeah.
Exactly.
I
So
was
the
gonna say
Small
water,
World's
right in the
the
boat.
Small World song is the most played song in music history, because there's not a Disney park anywhere in the world that doesn't have a version of Small World. It's never not playing. And once you hear it, it's never not playing in your head, right? It just goes on and on and on. And just like Carousel of Progress, It's a Small World was created for the 1964-65 New York World's Fair. One other person, favorite Disney park attraction. How about you, Jim? What's your favorite?
Actually, I was at the Carousel of Progress in the 1964 World's Fair.
Wow. What was that fair like?
It was very interesting. They had super modern stuff. Actually, this is funny. I mentioned this to my grandson the other day. I said it was the first place I ever used it. First time I ever used a push button phone. And he said, phones had buttons? Okay.
Most Americans saw their first computer at that fair.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. But there's some classics in my mind. Getting old, I like the People Mover stuff. The Skyline things are really cool. But the Horror of Terror Hotel catches me every time. That just gets your emotions just so fired up.
Yeah, that's a great attraction that you have at Hollywood Studios that opened in 1994. And I like that you like the scary stuff, because we're going to talk here for a moment about Haunted Mansion. Now, when Walt opened Disneyland, his vision was a place where parents and children could have fun together. His wife, Lily, was horrified by this dream, this goal, this vision, this idea. She said to Walt, "Why would you want an amusement park? Those places are filthy." And Walt said, "Well, that's the point. Mine will be clean." And ask anyone who was there when it opened in July of 1955. They'll tell you they had never stepped into a public space so impeccably clean. And when you think of a Disney park today, you associate it with cleanliness, right? Well, Walt knew that he needed some sort of haunted house. That was sort of the expectation of amusement parks in the 50s and 60s. The challenge was, how was he going to do it and keep his promise to Lily that his park would be clean? You can't have this rundown, dilapidated, dirty house in the middle of his clean Disneyland. Well, ultimately, they built a house based off of a mansion in Baltimore. They constructed it in what would become New Orleans Square in 1963, and then they get distracted. They get busy with that World's Fair that gave us the Carousel of Progress, that gave us It's a Small World, gave us great moments with Mr. Lincoln, gave us the Ford Magic Skyway, and then they come home, open New Orleans Square without any attractions yet. Walt Disney sadly dies December of 1966. They opened Pirates 3 months after his death, March of 67. And then they finally get busy with Haunted Mansion. It's the only attraction created simultaneously for both Disneyland in California and Magic Kingdom, Walt Disney World, Florida. Now, the one here in California is a little bit different, a little bit unique, because you step into the house that you see in front of the strip that says Disneyland Railroad. And then you go into a stretching room that here in California actually serves as an elevator. It takes you underground, and then you walk into the show building outside the park. And the reason why you have to go underground is we don't have nearly as much land here in California as you have at the park in Florida. And so you've got to get underneath the railroad, beyond the berm, and again into that show building. The story behind the berm is Walt's accustomed to telling stories. He's used to having the control of a soundstage. Now he's going to tell stories in an outdoor environment. How does he get the control back? He dredges the rivers of America, and in dredging that river ends up with 350 tons of dirt and builds a berm around the perimeter of the park. And again, you need the elevator to get underneath that berm, past the railroad, and into the show building. Now, in Florida, the 27,440 acres, that's the berm, because the goal is to keep the magic of the Magic Kingdom in and the distractions of the outside world out. Here's the application for you as a leader. How many of you get up every morning and you've got this goal, you've got this vision, you know where you want to go, you know where you want to take your team, but as soon as the day starts, you're responding to text messages, you're responding to emails, you're answering voice messages, and you're in meeting after meeting after meeting. Raise your hand if that sounds familiar. As a leader, you have got to build a berm around your goals, a berm around your vision, a berm around your calendar and your schedule. And I don't care if it's 5 or 15 minutes a day, you have got to keep the magic of your kingdom in and the distraction of all the text messages, all the emails, all the voicemails, and all of the meetings out. I promise you, if you do that for 15 minutes a day over the course of the next 6 months, your life as a leader is going to look completely different. Now, when I wrote my first book, at the time I was working as Dean of Student Success, Professor of Humanities in higher education. I was juggling hats with 3 different jobs, and now I wanted to become a writer and ultimately a speaker. I wrote my first book by committing to writing 333 words a day, no matter what. It was non-negotiable. I was all in, $40 a single suitcase, one-way ticket. And 333 words takes anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes. Now, there were some days I wrote more. I never wrote less. So again, ask yourself, where do you want to go? Where do you want to be in 6 months, a year, 5 years from now? And are you distracted with everything that's keeping you from those goals and from that vision? Or are you going to build a berm around it and commit to taking action each and every day? Any questions or comments on that? All right, let's move into Fantasyland. The dream for Disneyland came to Walt in the 1940s on what was known in the Disney household as Daddy's Day. On Saturday afternoons, Walt would take his girls, Diane and Sharon, around Southern California. Lots of options, lots of things to do here, beaches, mountains, museums. Their favorite place to go was this merry-go-round in Griffith Park. And the girls would ride the merry-go-round. Walt would sit on a bench. And one day he was like, why isn't there should be a place where parents and children can have fun together. And that's where the dream was born. And while he was building Disneyland, he actually called Griffith Park and said, hey, it's Walt Disney. I'm there every Saturday with my daughters. We love your merry-go-round. It's given me a dream for building my own amusement park. I want to buy it from you. And they were like, we love you, Walt, but if it's all the same, we're going to keep our merry-go-round. And so Walt had to build his own merry-go-round, and he shopped the country for a turntable, shopped the country for horses, ultimately made them all jumpers and made them all white. Now, I want you to go back to your storytelling, because that's why Disneyland exists, for the purposes of telling stories. In a story, who rides the white horse? When you think of someone riding a horse,
The heroes.
the hero. If you're the leader of a team today, if you manage folks, if you supervise people, they are looking to you to be their hero. Understand, they're never going to be more invested in you, never going to be more invested in your company, never more invested in your goals, your dreams, your vision, your success than you are in them. They're looking for you to have their back. They're looking for you to be their hero. Dumbo the Flying Elephant is an opening day attraction and one of the few interactive attractions, because there's a lever. And that lever allows you to either soar or go back down to the ground. Think about every interaction you have with your team, with your customers, with your friends, with your family. They're interactive, and it's the same kind of lever. When people spend time with you, are they energized? Are they excited? Have you helped them soar? Or are they low and down and grounded and can't wait to get away? And it's also a challenge to remind our team as a leader that we have both external customers, which I think hopefully we think a lot about in terms of service and support. We also have internal customers. And so every text message, every email, every meeting, every conversation is an opportunity to lift someone up or push them back down. And I want to challenge you to set the example of always soaring and always lifting people up. Now, when it comes to training well, hiring well, culture is critical. When Walt was building Disneyland, he hired a gentleman out of Texas who had been in the airplane manufacturing business. And Walt wasn't a micromanager, but he said to Van Arsdale France, I want you to put together a training program. Ultimately became Disney University. And Walt had one edict. I'm building the happiest place on earth. So please, for the love of God and all things holy, hire happy people. And so I get asked, how does Disney do it? Like, how do they have this amazing group of cast members? How do they achieve such high level of guest service and guest satisfaction? How is it that 70% of any of the people spending money have already been there? And it's culture. Walt was building the happiest place on earth, and he just told Van Arsdale France, hire happy people. You can train someone to do almost anything. But you know what you can't do, leaders? You can't train for attitude. So think about your culture. Think about who you are. Think about what you want you and your team and your business to be, and hire accordingly. I can't tell you how many faculty members I knew in higher ed who didn't like students. We've all been to the doctor, and it's obvious we're with a doctor who doesn't like patients. Or ministry. You ever been around a pastor who didn't like people? Same thing. So again, figure out who you are, figure out what you want, what you value, and then hire the right people. And in hiring the right people and creating that culture, you have a responsibility to not just lead down, but to encourage your people to lead up. What do I mean by that? As the leader, you set the vision, but you don't know everything. And you have to establish a culture where if you're wrong, your team members can tell you you're wrong, and you need to go in a new and different direction. You don't want yes men. You don't want Pinocchios who know better, but are lying to you regardless. Let's talk real quick about Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room. It's always referred to as Walt Disney's Enchanted Tiki Room because this is the first audio animatronics attraction. We go from Tiki Birds in 1963 to Lincoln in 1964 to Pirates of the Caribbean in 1967. Just an explosion in innovation and technology. But the very first audio animatronics attraction is the Tiki Room in June of 1963. It was Walt's idea. He paid for all of the research. He paid for all of the technology. And so this was an attraction that he actually owned. It wasn't owned by Disneyland, wasn't owned by the studio. Now, any of us old enough to remember the ticket or coupon books, A, B, C, D, and E? You would pay $1 to get in. And then again, the individual rides were anywhere from 10 to 35 cents. Well, eventually Disney bundled all of that together. And you would buy a ticket book that included your ticket to get into the park. and then a certain number of tickets for A attractions, B attractions, all the way up to E. Tiki Room wasn't a ticket book attraction. Cost 75 cents, 75 cents that went directly into Walt Disney's pocket. Because again, it was his idea. He owned it. He paid for all of the research, all of the development, all of the innovation. Quick question for you as leaders. On any given day, who do you spend the most time with? Any given day. Shout it out. Who do you spend the most time with?
Well, first is going to be me. And the second is probably going to be my wife.
So it's fascinating, Jim. I do this workshop around the country, and people will say my assistant. People will say my wife. People will say my kids. If they're teachers, they'll say my students. But you had it right from the very beginning. Yourself. Wherever you go, there you are. And you're not going to be able to lead others until you have learned to lead whom? Yourself. And so let me ask you this question. What are you doing to invest in yourself, in your career as a leader? Too many of us wait for a boss or someone else to tell us to read this book, to go to this conference, to attend this webinar. I get asked all the time, oh my gosh, you get to travel the country and write and speak on Disney. How did you get that job? I created it. And I created it by investing in it. So again, you have to learn to lead yourself before you can lead others. And that requires an investment. The last book that you read, last webinar that you signed up for, last conference that you attended, you've got to own it, just like Walt owned the Enchanted Tiki Room, because just like that is Walt Disney's, your life, your career, your success, you have to own that as well. All right, our last land is Tomorrowland, which was easily the sparsest area of the park when it opened in 1955. Walt had Disneyland built in exactly a year, and as late as January of 55, they had not broken ground onto Tomorrowland, and they were running out of both time and money. So he called his team together and he said, hey, look, we're running out of time, we're running out of money. We haven't even broken ground onto Tomorrowland. I think what we should do is just plan on putting up a fence and telling the public Tomorrowland will open when? Tomorrow. The next day, he had another meeting, made a completely different decision. We never do that, right? We never tell our team one thing one day and then something else the next. What he said to his team was, hey, we promised the public a complete park. We'll do the best we can with Tomorrowland. We'll fix it later. And so when it opened on July 17th, 1955, there was hardly anything there. In fact, it wasn't even landscaped like the rest of the park. Walt sent cast members around to take the weeds, turn them upside down, attach Latin names to try and trick the guests into thinking it was landscaped like the rest of the park. Now, he fulfills his promise and fixes Tomorrowland with a second grand opening in June of 1959, giving us the first of the famous e-ticket attractions, Matterhorn Monorail Submarine Voyage. And the original vision for Tomorrowland when it opened in 1955 was a vision of the future in 1986. Anybody remember 1986? And the reason why they picked 1986 is that was the next year Halley's Comet was coming around. They had to pick something, and so they just picked 1986, 31 years into the future. Here's what's really frightening in 2024. 1986 is like 36, 37 years now into the past. You're looking at the clock of the world that used to stand at the entrance to Tomorrowland. How many of you are shocked at how quickly the clock ticks every single year? You started 2024 with goals, dreams, vision, and a definition of success, and we're already halfway through September. It's frightening. So here's my challenge to you. We're going to get to the end of 2024, regardless of whether you lead or not. A year from now, it's going to be September 18th, 2025, regardless of whether you take action or not. And so if the time's going to pass regardless, you might as well do it. You might as well lead yourself. You might as well lead your team. You might as well take your company into what? That great, big, beautiful tomorrow that Walt was always talking about and Walt was always singing about. Disneyland will never be completed as long as there is imagination left in the world. I believe that about leaders. I believe that about you. I believe that about your team. And I believe that about whatever you're trying to accomplish this morning. And then lastly, we end with this. We're back on Main Street. Again, there's a single entrance in Main Street USA, single exit out. Walt wanted to control the opening shot, first impression, and he knew that people remembered the last scene in a film. And so he wanted to make sure we exited out the same way that we came in, because that's where he had the most amount of control. What you may not realize is as you are walking down Main Street in either direction, entering in or exiting out, just like a movie has credits, Walt is letting the credits roll as you walk past the buildings on Main Street USA. These credits are known as windows on Main Street, and it's Walt saying thank you to the people who, again, helped make his impossible dream possible. How many of you have a team of people who make your success possible this morning? Raise your hand. When's the last time you said thank you? When's the last time you said I appreciate you? When's the last time you gave credit where credit was due? My challenge to you today is to find one person to write a handwritten personal thank you note to, and think of it as their window on Main Street for helping you get to where you are this morning. Think about it in terms of a relationship. How many of you would stick in a marriage if you never heard thank you, if there was zero gratitude and zero appreciation from your significant other? How many of you like to be thanked? How many of you like to be appreciated? How many of you like to hear, hey, you did a great job? Exactly. And your team wants to hear that as well. Any questions or comments? All right, well, Jim mentioned that I have a blog, and so the only thing I'm asking from you this morning is to sign up for my free Wednesdays with Walt newsletter. And what I do is I take stories from Walt's life, stories from Disneyland, stories from Walt Disney World, and use those stories to inspire and motivate leaders to be better at the challenges that you face on a daily and weekly basis. So there's the QR code, and you're immediately going to get a complete printout of a lot of what we talked about this morning, i.e. 7 leadership lessons from the happiest place on earth. So I'm going to stop talking at this point, and if anybody has a question or comment, I would love to answer anything that you have.
I'd just like to say I really enjoyed the information. I have never personally been on the inside of Walt Disney. I've had opportunity, but I took my girls years ago and they did not want to go in. They would rather stay outside and do all the other attractions or whatever. But I do plan on taking my grandson one day, and I look forward to looking at all the things that you have pointed out in this meeting. But I kind of got tickled at the light bulb, because that would be me. Because I'm very anal. I'm very anal. So I thought that was kind of funny that you brought that out as far as attention to detail. I kind of call it being anal, but I thought the whole presentation was very good. And
Thank you.
also back to what Jim was saying earlier about the curve, what I've learned as I get older too is to take the curve and not try to force skipping the curve, because when you do, it never works. It just brings on more stress. So everything happens for a reason, I believe. And I found that when you just deviate for a little while and take the curve, you know, it's a lot easier, you know, in the end. So that's my
Absolutely. Yeah, I truly do believe that everything happens for a reason. And you know, I've had 2 brain tumors. I've suffered through a divorce. I've had you know, people disappoint me, people betray me, and I look at my life now, and I'm exactly where I am and who I am as a result of all of those curves, all of those failures, all of those disappointments. Look back at COVID 4 years ago, right? How many of you are better at what you do and who you are because of the pivots you made during COVID? Absolutely. And so when we're faced with those curves, thank you for sharing that, Sarah. We
Yeah.
can either panic or pivot, implode or innovate, retreat or be resourceful. And it didn't matter whether it was the bankruptcy, it didn't matter whether it was losing Oswald, it didn't matter whether it was no one believing in Snow White, no one believing in Disneyland. Walt always pivoted, he always innovated, he always found a way to be resourceful, and that's why we know who he is today.
That's great stuff, Jeff. Before I forget, there's my handwritten thank you.
Awesome.
I don't have nowhere to send it, but I took a couple of pages of notes, and you know, a big part of learning, even though some things we hear, repetition is the law of learning, and the presentation is a big part of that. So, as leaders and people that want to lead and want to learn, you've got to surround yourself with people that share ideas and share things with you that could definitely help you grow. We all know we don't know what we don't know. And the way to fix that is to get around people that can share things with you that you can learn and know and grow from. And one of the really good things that you said here towards the end, you said, own your success and create it. And you're a very good example of that. Everybody's had failures through their lives and could have just fallen apart, but didn't happen. And you created this whole Disney world in your own mind, you know, your version of it, and able to take it and share it out to other people and help them develop leadership skills simply by watching somebody else and taking lessons from that. And that's really pretty awesome that you were able to take that. You know, I'm very fortunate. I mentioned 10 years ago was a big difference than what I am today. And reason being is because I did attach myself to a visionary, to somebody who was starting something that looked like it would never fly off, you know. And I'm talking about the company I work for that's got, I'm number 40 in a company that has 90,000 agents in it, simply because somebody said, we can do this. And trust me, there's a bunch of bumps in the road when you're trying to get something going. There's a lot of bumps, but the key is, goes back to what you talked about. You got to surround yourself with happy people. You've got to surround yourself with people that can see your vision and it matches into something that they want to do. So you're growing together. It's not people trying to make your thing come true. It's growing together. And you know, I've been to Disney bunches of times. I took my daughter Tara's on here, took her down there when she was like 5, first time in California. And I think that was the 25th anniversary way back then. And we actually got a picture with Mickey and a pin, and the tickets, actually, we went again to Disney. We didn't use all our time on the tickets, and the tickets were still good when we went to Florida many, many years later, which, you know, says a lot about the company itself. They could have said, oh, that expired, you know, we're going to keep you $100, but they didn't. And all of these little things that they do to keep bringing people back is just remarkable, just remarkable. I'm fascinated.
It is. And I'll be honest, as I travel the country, you know, people will complain, why is it so expensive? Because it's not $1 anymore, and it's not $100 anymore either. And when they see that original ticket price of $1, they're like, oh, if only it cost $1 today. But guess what the number 2 complaint is?
Food.
Why is it so crowded?
That's a good point.
Can you imagine having a business problem where people complain that you charge too much and you have too many customers, right?
Well, there's old saying that there's a reason why people wait in line to eat in a good restaurant.
Correct.
There's a reason for that. Because
Yep.
it's good. It's good.
Yeah. So
Um,
pay attention, to what Disney is doing in terms of how they interact with you and how they make sure you have everything you want and everything that you need, and how they're engaging with you emotionally in the stories that they tell inside the park. Every one of those interactions is a lesson for us as leaders.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Jeff, I definitely appreciate your time. It says a lot about you. It really does. And your information is priceless. Somebody actually put that in the comments. I know you probably couldn't follow the comments, but somebody said this is just priceless. And
Awesome.
I appreciate that, and you taking the time to do that. Do you also do coaching, leadership coaching?
So I do coaching. I'm putting together a Wisdom of Walt masterclass. And Jim, you know this from our membership freedom. For me, it starts with the free blog, and then we scale up from there. Whether it's the books, whether it's the course, whether it's coaching, whether it's doing a keynote at a conference. This is my passion, and so if anybody wants to reach out to me in terms of how I can work with you at the next level, please don't hesitate to do that. My email address is jeff@thewisdomofwalt.com. And you can stay current and up to date with me 100% for free by simply signing up for the email newsletter.
Perfect. Perfect. All right. Well, Jeff, thank you. Let me throw this out there again. We have these kind of conversations, not this deep, of course, in Real Estate Strategy Desk. So if anybody wants to connect on that, just go to realestatestrategydesk.com for some more information. And Jeff, appreciate it much. Some people asked about the recording, and if you don't have a problem with it, we'll share that out.
Please do.
Good deal. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Good luck.
Thank you.